This is the tutorial for how to sew the Lewes skirt. If you don't already have the pattern, the link is in the description. We're going to start with our outer yoke. Now I've written B for back and F for front on these pieces because they look very similar, but they are in fact slightly different. So we're just going to do one seam on the side. So as you look at the wrong side of the front, it's the left seam. I'm going to stitch it 1 centimetre because the other side will have the zip in. So 1 centimetre seam allowance on all my patterns unless otherwise specified. There's our stitch line, centimetre in. Put that to one side. This is our inner yoke, and again I've marked front and back because we need to do the opposite seam on this because it's going inside, so it's all a bit back to front. So this time we need to do the right hand seam on our front panel. I mean, at the end of the day, as long as they match, for when you put the zip in, it doesn't matter. Oh, my interfacing is coming away a little bit there from the yoke. I will have to have a look at that and press that in a minute. Sewing again 1 centimetre from the side, little back tack, off we go. That's 1 centimetre again. So we're going to press this seam open. It's all enclosed, so it won't need finishing off with a zigzag or anything. So we're going to press this one open as well. That's it. That's our outer yoke and our inner yoke seams. Now we're going to start with our top frills. This is the narrowest of the frills. As you can see, there's a line on your pattern which indicates where the zip comes to. So I've got a little snip here, look where that line was. I only need to do it on one side though. Doesn't matter which side because these frills don't have a front or a back. So I've put that pin in there so that I know to leave that top open. And this side I'm going to put a pin at the top so I know that's the one I'm going to sew all the way down. Here we go, 1 centimetre, back tack, off we go. This is the whole of the seam. And the next one I'm going to start at that notch, little back tack, so we've got the end open ready for the zip later on. There we go. So you can see there's that little opening that side. This side's all the way down. I'm going to overlock all the way down that one, and this one I'm going to open up and do some overlocking on them separately. You can use zigzag if your machine has it, or if you've got a preferred method for finishing off your edges. There we are. Look, we're going to press that one open so that we can put the zip in later. This one can just be pressed to one side altogether. Now for the bottom frill. I'm going to do the same, just place them same sides together, right sides, and match those notches. There we go. Right sides together. Notch, 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 notch. Double notches on the bottom frill. Pin them together. Stitch 1 centimetre. Other side is going to be exactly the same. 2 notches together, pin them, 1 centimetre seam allowance. Make sure you haven't got anything twisted, that they're flat. 1 centimetre, here we go. This is a nice straightforward seam. Give them an overlock. Sorry about my hairy overlocking. I need a new blade in my overlocker. So we're just going to press those seams to one side. So this is back to our top frill. That's one side is pressed just all one way, and the other side you can see is pressed open, ready for our zip, that little space at the top. And then the bottom frill, we've just pressed them both to one side. Here we go, because they're just a straightforward seam. I've just overlocked them together, again very hairy, and pressed them one way. That's the other side. There we go. Let's put some gathering threads in. This is the top of our top frill. This is the bit where the zip joins. So we're going to start by stitching 1 centimetre in, and then again another stitch line all the way around the top that's halfway between the first stitch line and the raw edge, so about 5mm in. I put my machine on the largest stitch length. You can use slightly thicker thread on your bobbin if that helps you, if you're worried about the threads breaking, but I find if it's a light cotton it's adequate just to use your regular thread. Now let's attach this top frill to the yoke. This is our outer yoke. I'm starting with the side where the zip goes because I've got that little opening, so I'm going to match that side seam up to that side of the yoke. Pop a pin in it, and then you'll want to fold your yoke into quarters to mark a little notch at the centre front and the centre back. You can use the side seams as a guide if you measure halfway between, and do the same on your frill. I'll just fold this one quickly and show you that's where I put my little notch. So that's the quarter. This just helps you evenly spread the gathers. So I'll pin those together, my quarter marks. So that's my centre fronts. Then I'm going along to my side seam of my yoke and my side seam of my frill. Match those nicely together like so. Pop another pin in. Then we want the next quarter, which will be the centre back and the centre back of the frill. Pop those together. And then it's the side seam again. We're back to the zip. There we go. So as you can see, we've got quarter pins. We've got pins at the side seam, pins centre front, pins centre back. Now we're going to gently pull these gathering threads. I always use the bobbin thread to pull up the gathers. You should be able to just quite smoothly push those along the length of the yoke. I'll show you how to do the front. The back is exactly the same. So it's just easing these gathers along until the space between the pins is the same on the frill as it is on the yoke. So you've got two pieces to pin together that are the same length. And you'll want to fiddle with those gathers to try and get them as even as possible so you don't get any big gobs in it. There we go, you can see they're the same length now. They've lied together nice and flat, and that will go nicely under the sewing machine, and we'll stitch that centimetre so it'll be on that stitch line pretty much. So obviously gather all of your frill before you start sewing, and put your stitch length back to your normal stitch length and stitch your centimetre down. There you go, you can see the stitch line is pretty much exactly on the gather thread there. Take out your pins. Might want to give your gathers a little bit of a steam just to help them lie flat a bit, and push that seam allowance up towards the yoke, because that'll all be enclosed in your yoke later on when you add the inner yoke. Nicely matched side seams. You can see I've steamed my gathers a little bit, and they're all the seams are pointing upwards. Okay, so let's go for this bottom frill. As you can see, again, I've quartered this by folding the side seams together halfway between the side seams. I've got a little notch front and back for my quarters, and I'm going to do the same for my frill. You'll notice the bottom frill, the top is slightly narrower than the bottom, than the hem. So fold using your side seams together, fold it in half again, and then just pop a little snip in or mark with a pencil or some chalk or whatever is your preferred method, just so that you know you've got even amount of fabric in each quarter of your frill. And we're going to do the same thing as we did before. Basically find those quarter notches, pin them together, and then move on to the side seams, pin those together, just working your way around the frill. Match those side seams. Next quarter, there's the little notch, and there's the little notch, pop those together, pin, and the last side seam. So now we've pinned all our quarters, we just need to pull up these threads. Again, use the bobbin thread to pull up. Pull up both by the same amount and just ease the gathering along the threads carefully until your frill matches the length of your other frill. There we go. We're just going to ease those along, and they're both the same length. Do that all the way around as you did before, and then you can stitch them together. Again, a centimetre in, off we go. So there you are. They're both sewn together. That's the bottom frill. I'm just going to overlock it. There you go, slightly hairy again. I must get that blade fixed. But that's basically done, and I will press that or steam that seam upwards like that. Now for the zip. I'm using a concealed zip or an invisible zip. You can use an ordinary one, but I'm going to show you how to put this one in today. When I use a concealed zip, I like to press the coils open or steam them so that you can get right in that gap. So if you pull it open like that and steam it with the iron, it just helps you get in a little bit closer. So I'm going to lay that on my fabric like so. Where that little stopper is, the top of that stopper needs to be a centimetre down from the raw edge at the top. Just pop a pin in it. There you go. You can see that little stopper there. The top of that needs to be a centimetre from the top. And all I'm going to do is stitch the zip tape to the edge of the fabric on a big stitch. I use this because I'm too lazy to do tacking, and this doesn't need removing afterwards, and I find also it just makes the zip a little bit more secure if it's stitched, the tape is stitched twice. So you literally just whoosh down past your opening a little bit. It should reach down into the seam a tiny bit. So stop my machine there and pull that zipper up so that I can get down to the end of the tape, which all just makes it a bit more stable and helps to stop it looking pokey at the bottom. So that's one side. You can see what it looks like there. Literally just a big stitch all the way down, like a big tack really. I'm going to do the same the other side. See, I've gone right past that bottom of the opening. So we take the fabric, fold it over and put it on that tape. And I'm going to undo my zip again. And then I need to lay again, that stopper needs to be a centimetre from the top. That's our seam allowance for sewing the yolks together. And we're going to stitch on the edge of the tape and the edge of the fabric again on a big stitch all the way down to the bottom. pull the zip up, put the foot down again, do that last little bit. Okay, so our zip is basically where it needs to be. We just need to stitch nice and closely now into the coil, which should be a lot easier if we've steamed it. So I'm going to get my zip foot on my machine and stitch as close to that coil as I can. This is my zip foot, yours may look a little different. Made my stitch the usual size again, not the large size. And I'm just going to follow the coil all the way down to the bottom, as far as I can get. You may not be able to get right to the bottom. Little back tack to secure it. There you see, it's as close as I can get to that coil, and I'm going to do the same the other side as well. There are plenty of methods for putting invisible zips in. If you have one you prefer, obviously use that one, or maybe experiment. Have a look on YouTube. There are lots and lots of different ways that you may find easier. This is just the way I've always done it. Now we're ready to attach our inner yoke, which is the interfaced yoke. So you can just about see my chalk markings front and back. They should match anyway now that we've put our zip in and everything. So we want to allow our 1 centimetre seam allowance from the edge of the zip there and from the top. Don't want to stitch over that plastic stopper and break needles. Match our side seams. Leave that centimetre seam allowance again to be tucked in later. And we're going to stitch all the way along our waistline, 1 centimetre from the raw edge. So we should be avoiding that plastic stopper because we've put it 1 centimetre away from the raw edge, which is our seam allowance, so it should nicely butt up against the edge there. And away we go all the way around our waistline. Now we're going to clip the corners off the seams, just reduces the bulk a little bit, and do some clips into that seam allowance as close to the stitching as you can get without actually stitching the snipping the stitching. And then we're gonna edge stitch it, so that's basically pulling the seam allowance towards that inner yoke, the one with the seam with the interfacing on. That's it. Push that seam allowance up and stitch right on the edge there. So pull the seam allowance underneath as you go and stitch nicely on the edge to hold it all down. This is so helpful when it comes to pressing and getting a nice edge. There we go, that's what it looked like when you stitched it, and you'll be able to just fold it like that and it pretty much does it itself, and then you get a lovely edge to your waist. So next step, I've pressed up my seam allowance by 1 centimetre, but I've also put in a large stitch which was 1 centimetre away from the edge, just because it makes it a bit easier when you're pressing, and also it gives you something to sew into when you're stitching this down by hand. You can use the machine stitches rather than trying to pick out. If you've got a very densely woven fabric, it can be quite difficult to pick out a few threads from the fabric. So turn that back a centimetre as well, pin that to the zip, and a centimetre all the way up, and poke that end in as neatly as possible. I'm just going to do a quick bit of hand stitching here. Poke that end in. Nice big football on the end of my thread there, so it's not going anywhere. So just pick up a little bit of the zip tape, a little bit of the fabric, a little bit of the zip tape, and a little bit of the fabric, and just do that all the way along to the bottom. Forgive my horrible stitching. This was harder than I anticipated when you're at a funny angle looking through a camera rather than just sat with a nice cup of tea on the sofa. So continue sewing that all the way around, and that's what it should look like. Slightly neater with the off-screen stitching, but there we go. Now we're going to do the hem. So I'm just going to do a simple overlock and turn on this. You can turn and turn if you prefer, or do a deeper hem, put a frill on. There we go, I just overlocked it with my hairy overlocking. Give it a stitch and then press. And that should give you a Lewes skirt. Enjoy.